It began as a hushed exchange behind the sealed doors of Kensington Palace, one so tightly controlled that even senior aides were shut out. But the moment Princess Catherine emerged, pale and shaken, the illusion of calm shattered. Something had happened. And at the center of it all stood Princess Charlotte, suddenly no longer just a child of the crown, but the focus of a crisis no one was prepared to explain. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What unfolded in those early hours did not resemble the usual rhythms of royal life. There were no carefully staged statements, no reassuring smiles delivered to waiting cameras, no quiet leaks designed to soften the narrative before it reached the public. Instead, there was silence, an unnerving, deliberate silence that insiders now suggest was not accidental, but strategic. Reports began to circulate that an emergency consultation had been convened. Without warning, drawing together Catherine, Prince William, and a select circle of senior advisors whose presence alone signaled the gravity of the situation. These were not routine figures. These were individuals typically reserved for moments of constitutional sensitivity or deeply personal crises, moments when the monarchy itself seemed to hold its breath. Those familiar with palace operations began to notice the shift almost immediately. Communications teams, usually swift to respond to even the faintest ripple of speculation, had gone quiet. Phone lines that once buzzed with controlled narratives fell still. Briefings were delayed, then quietly canceled. And within that vacuum, speculation grew louder, sharper, more urgent. Insiders whispered of a sensitive development, though no one seemed willing or perhaps able to define exactly what that meant. The phrasing itself carried weight. Sensitive, in royal terms, could mean anything from personal health to matters of lineage, from private family struggles to issues that touch the very structure of the institution. But it was Catherine who revealed more than any statement ever could. Observers noted the subtle but unmistakable signs: her posture slightly unsteady, her expression drawn, her usual composure replaced by something more fragile, more human. This was not the poised Princess of Wales the public had come to recognize. This was a mother confronted with something unexpected, something deeply unsettling. And as she moved through the corridors, avoiding prolonged interaction, offering only the briefest acknowledgments, it became clear that whatever had occurred behind those doors had struck at something far more personal than protocol. Prince William, too, was seen in a rare moment of visible vulnerability. Later that evening, away from the formalities that often define royal appearances, he was reportedly observed spending extended time with Charlotte, offering quiet reassurance, his presence protective, almost instinctive. Those who witnessed the interaction described it as unusually tender, even for a father known for his devotion. It was not staged, it was not symbolic, it was real. And in that quiet exchange, many began to sense that Charlotte herself was not merely adjacent to the unfolding situation, she was at its center. What made the moment even more unsettling was the growing realization that this had not come entirely out of nowhere. Media insiders, those who tracked the subtle rhythms of royal life, began to piece together a pattern that had gone largely unnoticed. Small shifts in scheduling, unexpected cancellations, a slight but perceptible tightening of Charlotte's public appearances. At the time, these changes were dismissed as routine adjustments, the kind that happened quietly within royal households. But now, in hindsight, they appeared to form a narrative, a slow, almost imperceptible build towards something that had finally reached a breaking point. And as the whispers grew louder, as the silence became impossible to ignore, one truth began to emerge with chilling clarity. This was not a fleeting concern. This was not a minor disruption that could be managed behind closed doors and quietly resolved. Whatever had surfaced within that private meeting had implications, real, lasting implications that extended far beyond the immediate family. It touched something deeper, something more enduring, something tied not just to Charlotte as a child, but to Charlotte as a figure within a centuries-old institution. But what began as a quiet concern would soon escalate into something far more consequential, touching the very foundation of royal succession itself. Within hours, the matter reached the highest authority in the land. King Charles III, already weakened and burdened, summoned an emergency audience that insiders now describe as deeply unsettling. Whatever had surfaced was no longer confined to family, it had become a matter of crown, continuity, control. The summons itself was issued with a level of urgency rarely seen, even within the tightly controlled mechanisms of royal protocol. Messages were relayed through secure channels, schedules were abruptly cleared, and access to key areas of Buckingham Palace was quietly restricted. Those familiar with the inner workings of the monarchy began to sense that this was not a routine consultation. Reports suggest that the king was briefed in private first, before any wider discussion took place, a move that indicates both the sensitivity and the potential magnitude of what he was being told. There were no aides present beyond a minimal circle, no immediate statements prepared, only a closed-door exchange that, according to various interpretations, left even the most seasoned advisors unsettled. What followed only deepened the sense of unease. Medical experts were brought in not as a precaution but as participants in the discussion itself. At the same time, constitutional advisors, those tasked with safeguarding the structural integrity of the monarchy, were reportedly present, their involvement signaling that this was no longer just a personal matter. It was something that could ripple outward, touching legal frameworks, succession protocols, and the fragile balance that holds the institution together. Insiders whisper that the overlap between medical concern and constitutional implication created a tension unlike anything seen in recent years, as if two separate crises had suddenly merged into one. Security, too, shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. Access points were monitored more closely, movements within the palace became more controlled, and even long-standing staff members found themselves operating under stricter guidelines. It was not chaos, far from it. It was precision, a calculated tightening of the environment designed to contain information, to prevent leaks, to maintain control over a narrative that was threatening to spiral beyond the palace walls. And yet, despite these measures, the atmosphere could not be fully contained. Those present described it as grave, a word that carries weight within royal circles, reserved for moments when the stakes extend far beyond the immediate. All of this unfolded against the backdrop of the king's own ongoing health struggles, a reality that added another layer of complexity to an already fragile situation. There is a quiet but undeniable vulnerability in a monarch facing personal challenges while simultaneously being called upon to navigate a crisis of this scale. Reports suggest that Charles, though composed, appeared visibly strained not merely by the information presented to him, but by the implications it carried. Because this was not just about responding in the moment. It was about anticipating what might come next, about protecting not only his family, but the institution he had sworn to uphold. And perhaps most striking of all was the suggestion, subtle but persistent, that this moment had not arrived entirely without warning. Various interpretations of the king's reaction hint at a level of recognition, as though elements of this situation had been considered before, discussed in quieter terms, filed away as unlikely but not impossible. If that is true, then this emergency audience was not just a response. It was the activation of something long understood, something that had remained dormant until now. But the king's response would reveal that this situation wasn't entirely unexpected, suggesting deeper roots hidden within royal history. As details slowly surfaced, attention turned not to the present but to the past. Buried within decades-old royal protocols and quietly preserved documents lay a legacy clause, one that, according to various interpretations, may now directly involve Princess Charlotte of Wales in ways no one publicly anticipated. What had first appeared to be a sudden and isolated concern began to unfold into something far more intricate, something layered with history, precedent, and quiet decisions made long before Charlotte was ever born. Insiders suggest that as the king's advisors combed through internal records, attention shifted toward a series of constitutional safeguards mechanisms designed not for ordinary circumstances, but for rare and unpredictable moments when the continuity of the monarchy might be tested. These were not documents meant for public discussion. They existed in the background, referenced only in times of uncertainty. Their language deliberately complex, their implications often left open to interpretation. At the center of this growing scrutiny were the so-called letters, patent formal legal instruments that have, over centuries, shaped the structure of royal titles, succession, and authority. While their existence is widely known, their full scope is rarely discussed outside the highest levels of royal governance. Various interpretations of these documents suggest that they contain provisions not only for clear lines of succession but also for exceptional scenarios, situations where standard expectations may need to be reconsidered. And it is within these gray areas that Charlotte's situation now appears to be drawing unexpected attention. Experts familiar with royal history have begun to hint at what they describe as rare constitutional triggers, moments when dormant clauses become relevant again, not because they were designed for a specific individual, but because circumstances align in ways that echo past uncertainties. These triggers are not activated lightly. They require careful interpretation, consultation, and above all, discretion. But the mere suggestion that such mechanisms are being revisited has sent a quiet ripple through those who understand the weight of these traditions. Because when history begins to reassert itself, it rarely does so without consequence. And there are precedents faint, often overlooked, but undeniably present. Moments in royal history where questions of lineage, health, or legitimacy force the institution to adapt, to reinterpret its own rules in order to preserve stability. These moments were not always public. In fact, many were deliberately obscured, their details softened over time to maintain the appearance of continuity. Yet, as researchers and insiders revisit these parallels, a pattern begins to emerge, one that suggests the monarchy has always prepared for the unexpected, even when it hoped those preparations would never be needed. What makes the current situation so compelling is not just the existence of these historical frameworks, but the renewed focus they have brought to the concept of succession itself. For years, the line of succession has been presented as fixed, predictable, almost inevitable. But now, quietly and without formal acknowledgement, that certainty is being questioned, not in a way that signals immediate change, but in a way that reveals just how much complexity lies beneath the surface. Because succession is not merely a list of names. It is a system, a structure, a carefully maintained balance between tradition and adaptability. And as this deeper narrative begins to take shape, one truth becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Whatever is unfolding around Charlotte is not happening in isolation. It is intersecting with a legacy that stretches back generations. A legacy that carries with it both strength and vulnerability. The past is no longer distant. It is present, active, and according to those watching closely, beginning to influence decisions in real time. Yet it wasn't just history that was stirring, because Charlotte herself was beginning to respond in ways that caught even seasoned observers off guard. In the midst of mounting uncertainty, it was Charlotte's own reaction that left those closest to her stunned. Calm, composed, and quietly observant, she displayed a level of maturity that insiders now describe as deeply significant, a moment that may mark the beginning of a transformation few saw coming. What unsettled those within the inner circle was not panic, not confusion, but the absence of both. Reports suggest that while conversations around her grew heavier, more guarded, Charlotte herself remained unusually steady, absorbing rather than reacting, listening rather than questioning. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible to the outside world, but unmistakable to those who knew her best. This was not the spontaneous, spirited child often seen in public glimpses. This was someone adapting in real time, adjusting to a weight she may not have fully understood but somehow seemed prepared to carry. Those closest to the family began to notice it first during private interactions. Moments between Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Charlotte took on a different tone, quieter, more deliberate, as though every word carried more meaning than before. Insiders whisper that William's approach became increasingly protective, his presence less ceremonial and more instinctive, as if he were attempting to shield her from something he himself was still processing. Catherine, however, carried a different burden. For her, this was not just a matter of duty or protocol, it was deeply personal. Observers describe a tension beneath her composure, a silent struggle between her role as a future queen and her instinct as a mother trying to make sense of something unfolding far too quickly. And yet, despite the emotional gravity surrounding her, Charlotte did not retreat. Instead, she seemed to lean into the moment, her demeanor shifting in ways that even seasoned royal watchers found difficult to ignore. There was a stillness about her, a kind of quiet awareness that suggested she understood, at least in part, that something significant was happening. Various interpretations of her behavior point to what some have cautiously described as early signs of preparedness, not in a formal sense, in the way she carried herself, the way she responded to those around her. the way she seemed to adapt without resistance. This shift did not go unnoticed within palace operations either. Security protocols around Charlotte reportedly tightened, not dramatically, but enough to signal a change in status. Increased attention, more controlled movements, a subtle recalibration of how she was positioned within both private and public settings. It was not announced, not acknowledged, but it was there a quiet reinforcement of her importance within a situation that was still being carefully contained. And with that came an unspoken understanding. Whatever was unfolding was not temporary. It required adjustment, preparation, and above all, discretion. For Catherine, the emotional weight of this transition was perhaps the most profound. Insiders suggest that while she maintained her outward composure, there were moments behind closed doors where the reality of the situation became impossible to ignore. The balance she had long maintained between nurturing her children and preparing them for their roles was suddenly shifting, accelerating in ways no parent could truly anticipate. And at the center of that shift was Charlotte, no longer simply growing into her place within the monarchy, but being quietly guided toward it under circumstances that felt anything but ordinary. What makes this moment so compelling is not just the change itself, but the contrast it reveals. A child expected to live within the gentle rhythms of royal upbringing now standing at the edge of something far more demanding. A family known for its control now navigating uncertainty. Strength emerging not from certainty but from adaptation. And within that tension, Charlotte's quiet composure becomes more than just a reaction, it becomes a signal, a hint of what may come next. But Charlotte's quiet strength would soon give way to something far more public, an unexpected message that changed everything. Then came the moment no one anticipated. In what insiders now describe as carefully orchestrated yet deeply personal, Princess Charlotte of Wales delivered a message subtle, measured, but unmistakable. And in doing so, she altered the tone of the entire situation. It did not arrive with fanfare or declaration. There was no formal statement, no direct acknowledgement from the palace. And yet, those watching closely understood immediately that something had shifted. Reports suggest that Charlotte's appearance, whether through a brief public moment or a carefully observed gesture, was anything but accidental. Every movement, every expression, carried a weight that seemed disproportionate for someone her age, and yet entirely deliberate in its impact. This was not performance. It was presence, and that presence spoke louder than any official communication ever could. Media outlets, already circling the unfolding narrative, seized upon the moment with intense scrutiny. Analysts dissected every detail, every nuance, searching for meaning beneath the surface. Some interpreted it as reassurance, a quiet signal that stability remained intact, that whatever concerns had emerged were being managed with care. Others saw something more complex, something layered with intention, suggesting that this was not merely a response, but a message directed at those who understood the deeper mechanics of the monarchy. A message that said, "Control has not been lost." Within palace circles, the reaction was even more telling. Insiders whisper that the moment was described internally as strategically significant, a phrase rarely used without careful consideration. It implies planning, coordination, and above all, purpose. This was not a spontaneous act. It was, according to various interpretations, the result of quiet deliberation, an effort to shape perception without revealing too much, to guide the narrative without confirming it. And at the center of that effort stood Charlotte, not as a passive figure, but as an active participant in a story far larger than herself. What made the moment so powerful was its ambiguity. It did not answer questions. It did not clarify the situation. Instead, it redirected attention, shifting the focus from uncertainty to composure, from speculation to symbolism. Royal watchers, those who have spent years interpreting the subtle language of the institution, noted the change almost immediately. The narrative, once dominated by concern and confusion, began to take on a different tone, one of quiet control, of measured response, of a system adapting in real time. And yet, beneath that controlled surface, questions continued to grow. Because if this message was indeed intentional, then it raised a far more complex issue. Who guided it? Reports suggest that such a moment would not occur without consultation, without input from those responsible for maintaining the monarchy's delicate balance between transparency and tradition. Some point to Senior advisors, others to the influence of Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, suggesting that Charlotte's role in this moment was shaped by those closest to her. But even this interpretation leaves room for uncertainty, because the monarchy rarely operates through a single voice. It is a network, a structure, a carefully aligned system where decisions are rarely simple. What remains undeniable is the effect. In a single, controlled moment, Charlotte shifted the narrative. She transformed a situation defined by silence into one marked by intention. She introduced a new layer to the story, one that suggested not just reaction, but strategy. And in doing so, she blurred the line between personal experience and institutional response, becoming both a participant and a symbol of something much larger. Yet behind this carefully measured moment lay a deeper strategy, one orchestrated at the highest levels of the royal institution. While the public absorbed Charlotte's message, far more calculated operation was unfolding behind palace walls. Advisors, strategists, and senior royals moved swiftly, crafting a response designed not just to contain the moment, but to reshape its meaning entirely. What appeared outwardly as calm was, according to insiders, the result of precise coordination. Reports suggest that within hours of the message taking hold in the public consciousness, a network of palace advisors had already begun aligning their approach. This was not reaction, it was strategy. Communications teams worked quietly, adjusting language, refining narratives, and deciding what would be said, what would be implied, and, perhaps most importantly, what would remain unsaid. Because within the monarchy, silence is not absence, it is control. And in moments like this, control becomes everything. At the center of this effort were senior figures whose roles rarely attract attention, but whose influence is deeply embedded within the institution. These are individuals responsible for maintaining continuity, for ensuring that even the most unexpected developments are absorbed without destabilizing the structure. Insiders whisper that their involvement signaled a shift from uncertainty to management, a transition from reacting to shaping. Carefully timed briefings began to circulate, not as official statements, but as subtle clarifications, guiding interpretation without committing to a fixed narrative. Media management became a critical component of this operation. Rather than confronting speculation directly, the strategy appeared to focus on redirecting it. Controlled disclosures, small, deliberate pieces of information were allowed to surface, each one designed to nudge the conversation in a particular direction. Some reports emphasized reassurance, highlighting the stability of the family unit. Others leaned into the theme of preparedness, subtly reinforcing the idea that the monarchy was not caught off guard, but was instead responding with quiet confidence. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant adjustment as public interest continued to intensify. Behind this orchestration was a deeper challenge, balancing transparency with protection. The monarchy, by its very nature, exists in a space where public visibility and private reality often collide. Too much disclosure risks vulnerability. Too little invites speculation. And in this moment, that tension was more pronounced than ever. Those guiding the response had to navigate this narrow path, ensuring that the public felt informed without exposing details that could complicate the situation further. It was not about revealing the full truth, it was about managing perception in a way that preserved stability. At the same time, there were clear signs of internal alignment among key members of the royal family. Reports suggest that King Charles III, Prince William, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, were operating with a shared understanding, presenting a unified front even as the situation continued to evolve. This alignment was not merely symbolic, it was essential. Because in moments of uncertainty, any hint of division can amplify instability. Unity, on the other hand, reinforces confidence both within the institution and beyond it. And yet, beneath the surface of this carefully managed response, there remained an undeniable urgency. This was not a situation that could simply be resolved and forgotten. It required ongoing attention, continuous adjustment, and a willingness to adapt as new information emerged. The strategy was not static, it was evolving, shaped by both internal considerations and external reactions. Every decision carried weight, every action potential consequences. What makes this moment particularly significant is the way it reveals the inner workings of the monarchy under pressure. The shift from private concern to public narrative, from uncertainty to strategy, from reaction to control, it all unfolds with a precision that speaks to centuries of experience. And yet, even with that experience, there is no guarantee of complete containment, because the world is no longer a passive observer. It is active, engaged, and constantly interpreting. But even the most carefully executed strategy cannot fully suppress the ripple effects of such a moment, especially when the world is watching. Across the world, the reaction was immediate and intense. From seasoned royal correspondents to global audiences, every detail was scrutinized, every gesture dissected. What had begun as a private concern had now become an international conversation. The shift was almost instantaneous. Within hours of Princess Charlotte of Wales's message entering the public sphere, headlines began to multiply, each one attempting to interpret what had just unfolded. Reports suggest that major outlets, from long-established publications to digital-first platforms, moved quickly to frame the narrative, drawing on limited information but expanding it through analysis, speculation, and historical context. The tone varied, some cautious, others bold, but the underlying urgency was unmistakable. This was not just another royal update. This was something deeper, something that demanded attention. Experts and commentators soon joined the conversation, each bringing their own perspective to a story that seemed to resist clear definition. Royal historians began revisiting past precedents, searching for moments that might mirror the current situation. Constitutional analysts weighed in, discussing the potential implications of what had been hinted at, even if nothing had been formally confirmed. And media insiders, those familiar with the inner workings of the palace, offered carefully worded insights, suggesting that the significance of the moment lay not in what was said, but in how it was delivered. It was, according to various interpretations, a message layered with intention, designed to communicate without revealing. But it was on social media where the reaction truly expanded. Platforms became saturated with theories, interpretations, and emotional responses, each one adding another layer to an already complex narrative. Some users expressed concern, focusing on Charlotte's age and the pressure she appeared to be facing. Others turned their attention to Catherine, Princess of Wales, noting the visible strain she had carried in the early stages of the situation. There was sympathy, certainly, but also curiosity, and with it, an increasing demand for clarity. Because in the absence of definitive answers, speculation tends to fill the void. Comparisons to past royal moments began to surface as well, further fueling the conversation. Observers pointed to previous periods of uncertainty within the monarchy, drawing parallels between then and now. Some referenced moments of transition, others times of crisis, suggesting that the current situation might represent a similar turning point. These comparisons were not always precise, but they served a purpose. They placed the present within a broader historical narrative, reinforcing the idea that what was unfolding was not isolated, but part of a larger pattern. At the heart of it all was a growing sense of emotional investment. The public, often seen as distant observers, had become deeply engaged, responding not just to the facts, but to the human elements of the story. Charlotte's composure, Catherine's visible concern, the king's involvement, each detail contributed to a narrative that felt both personal and institutional. It was this duality that made the situation so compelling. It was not just about the monarchy as an abstract concept. It was about individuals navigating uncertainty under the weight of expectation. And yet, for all the analysis, all the commentary, all the speculation, one thing remained constant: the absence of a complete picture. The more the story expanded, the more questions seemed to emerge. Exactly had triggered this sequence of events? How deep did its implications run? And perhaps most importantly, what would come next? Because while the world continued to watch, to interpret, to react, the core of the situation remained carefully guarded, its full meaning just out of reach. And yet, amid the noise and speculation, one question remains unanswered: what does this mean for the future of the crown? In the quiet aftermath of the storm, a new reality begins to take shape. Princess Charlotte of Wales, once simply the spirited daughter of the future king, now stands at the threshold of something far greater. Not by choice, but by circumstance, she has stepped into a role that may define the next era of the monarchy. What has changed is not visible in grand declarations or sweeping reforms. but in something far more subtle and perhaps far more powerful. Reports suggest that within the inner workings of the royal household, Charlotte's position is being quietly recalibrated, not elevated in any official sense, not publicly redefined, but gently adjusted to reflect a growing awareness of her significance within a shifting landscape. This is how the monarchy evolves, not through sudden transformation, but through measured adaptation, where roles expand long before they are formally acknowledged. And Charlotte, it seems, has become part of that quiet evolution. There is, according to insiders, a heightened sense of attentiveness surrounding her now. A careful balance is being maintained, one that allows her to remain a child while also preparing her, in ways both seen and unseen, for responsibilities that may come sooner than expected. This balance is not easy. It requires restraint, patience, and an understanding that the future cannot be rushed, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. And at the center of this delicate process stand Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, whose approach has become increasingly defined by protection as much as preparation. For them, this moment is not just about duty, it is about navigating the space between tradition and parenthood. Reports suggest that their decisions are guided not only by protocol, but by instinct, by a desire to shield Charlotte from the full weight of expectation while still acknowledging that it cannot be entirely avoided. It is a quiet tension, one that reflects the broader challenge facing the monarchy itself. How to preserve continuity without losing humanity, how to uphold legacy without overwhelming those who are meant to carry it forward. And legacy is, ultimately, what this moment speaks to most clearly. Because beyond the immediate concerns, beyond the speculation and the strategy, there is a larger narrative unfolding, one that stretches far beyond the present. The monarchy, by its very nature, exists across generations, each one inheriting not just titles, but responsibilities, expectations, and the unspoken understanding that their lives are part of something enduring. Charlotte's emerging role is not an isolated development. It is part of that continuum, a reminder that the institution is always looking ahead, always preparing for what comes next. What makes this transition particularly striking is its subtlety. There are no announcements declaring a new era, no formal acknowledgments of change. And yet, the shift is there, quiet, steady, undeniable. A growing focus on the next generation, a gradual movement toward the future, shaped not by sudden decisions, but by the accumulation of small, deliberate steps. It is within these steps that the monarchy reveals its resilience, its ability to adapt without appearing to change, to evolve while maintaining the illusion of permanence. And so, as the immediate intensity of the situation begins to settle, what remains is not uncertainty, but transformation. Not dramatic or disruptive, but measured and controlled. A young princess stepping into a space she did not seek, guided by those who understand both the privilege and the burden it carries. A family adjusting to new realities while holding firmly to the traditions that define them. And an institution once again demonstrating its capacity to endure even under pressure, even in the face of the unknown. In the end, the crown endures not through silence or secrecy, but through the quiet resilience of those born to carry its weight. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.